Now we study the structure of the hand. Before drawing the muscles on this model, let us make a section of the hand. First, second, third, fourth, and fifth metacarpal. Between them are the palmar interossei and dorsal interossei muscles. Palmar are adductors, pad, dorsal are abductors. So let us make these muscles. They are interosseous, arising from the adjacent bones and getting attached to the extensor expansion. Now, there is 4 dorsal interossei and 3 palmar interossei. We'll understand why there are 3 palmar interossei and 4 dorsal interossei by understanding the action. Because the adductor of the thumb, palmar interossei are adductors, because the adductor of the thumb is separate. So here it is the adductor pollicis. So now, after placing the pad dab and adductor pollicis, we'll place the 3 thenar and hypothenar muscles. Thenar means thumb side and hypothenar means little finger side. They are the opponents, the flexor, and the abductor. The opponents, the flexor, and the abductor. Opponents, flexor, abductor, pollicis or digiti minimi, flexor pollicis brevis, abductor pollicis brevis, and same way, same muscles for digiti minimi also. Then we place an aponeurosis, which is the palmar aponeurosis. And this palmar aponeurosis merges into the fascia of the deep fascia of the hypothenar and the thenar eminences. The palmar aponeurosis also gives a septum which divides the space under the palmar aponeurosis into a thenar space, thenar, and into a mid-palmar space. The other space between the adductor pollicis and here is called as adductor space. So these are the 3 spaces in the hand. Now we place the tendons. There are 4 tendons, 1, 2, 3 and 4, which are of flexor digitorum superficialis and 4 tendons of flexor digitorum profundus. Then we place a muscle which is in the skin here, which is the palmaris brevis muscle. So this is the palmaris longus aponeurosis, and this muscle is the palmaris brevis muscle. After this, you see this is the abductor pollicis brevis. Okay, this is the abductor pollicis brevis, and adjacent to it is the abductor pollicis longus, and then you know that the two tendons here are abductor pollicis longus and an extensor pollicis brevis. Then extensor pollicis longus. Then the muscles on the medial side of the snuff box, the extensor carpi, radialis, longus and brevis. Then we place the extensor indicis, the four digitorum, the digiti minimi, and of course the extensor carpi ulnaris has already got inserted into the carpus, so you don't see it in the metacarpal region. Then we place the most important muscle in the hand, and that muscle arises from the profundus tendon and gets inserted into the extensor expansion. So this one, then this one, then this one, and then this one. So these are the lumbricals, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So after this we'll tell you the action of the lumbricals first. Okay. The action of the lumbricals, if you want to understand, is you have to understand this small picture. This is the metacarpal. Here is the proximal phalanx. Here is the distal phalanx. Here is the intermediate phalanx, and here is the distal phalanx. Now, the extensor tendon, indicis or digitorum, comes like this and gets inserted into a triangular expansion. So this is the triangular expansion. You see the half of the triangle because you are seeing it from one side. Now this triangular expansion, the center of it will get inserted into the intermediate phalanx, extending the PIP, proximal interphalangeal joint, and the side of it from both sides will go and get inserted into the distal phalanx, extending the DIP joint. So any pull on this extensor expansion is of either the interossei, palmar or dorsal interossei, adducting or abducting the metacarpophalangeal joint, or here is the flexor digitorum profundus going to get inserted into the distal phalanx, and from it is arising the lumbrical getting inserted onto the extensor expansion. So this lumbrical will flex the MP joint and extend the PIP-DIP joint through the extensor expansion. So it will cause this position of the hand, which we call the intrinsic plus position. If the lumbrical fails, if any of the lumbrical fails or is paralyzed, then there will be extension at the MP joint and flexion at PIP and DIP joint. So this is the paralytic position, and this is called as claw hand. Please understand this, the action of lumbricals and how they produce the claw hand. Now the flexor digitorum superficialis muscle is superficial to this tendon. It splits into two and gets inserted into the intermediate phalanx. Therefore, the flexor digitorum superficialis flexes the PIP joint. So, this is the importance of these muscles which we have placed as lumbricals. After understanding this, let us try to draw these muscles on the skeleton that we are seeing here. So, flexor carpi radialis having two insertions on the second and third metacarpal. Flexor carpi ulnaris inserted on the pisiform and sending this pisio-hamate ligament under which passes the ulnar nerve. And palmaris longus inserted on the palmar epineurosis, which flexes the wrist in a cupped hand position. Then we place the palmar and dorsal introssei. So dorsal introssei first. So this dorsal introsseus will abduct this little finger and this middle finger, and this dorsal introssei will abduct in this direction. So any movement away from the center in the middle finger is abduction. So two dorsal introssei consume. Third dorsal introssei will abduct this finger. The digiti minimi has its own abductor. The dorsal introssei here, arising like this, will abduct the index finger. The thumb has its own abductor, pollicis brevis. So this is the situation of abducting at the metacarpophalangeal joint. Dorsal introssei. Now we place the palmar introssei, we'll place it in different color. So this palmar introssei will adduct this finger. This palmar introssei will adduct this finger. This palmar introssei will adduct this finger. And the thumb will have its own adductor pollicis, which will be attached to the, now this is the adductor pollicis. We place the adductor pollicis. Then we place the abductor pollicis brevis we have placed. The flexor pollicis brevis is here, and the opponens pollicis is inserted on the outer aspect of the metacarpal so that it rotates the metacarpal inwards, and this rotation is called as opponens. So this is the opponens pollicis. Same way the flexor digiti minimi here and the opponens digiti minimi onto the metacarpal. So this is the metacarpal, and both have their origin from the palmar carpal ligament. Palmar carpal ligament of the wrist, which forms the carpal tunnel. So this we have placed everything that can be seen from the palmar side. Now we'll go on to the dorsal side. We'll turn it around. Like this. We'll bring it here. We'll enlarge it. And we'll place the tendons now on the dorsal side. We have told you that the brachioradialis is inserted here on the radial styloid, flexing the elbow in mid-prone position. Okay. Then you have the Lister's tubercle. This is the Lister's tubercle. This one, and two tendons pass like this: the abductor pollicis brevis and the extensor pollicis brevis. Two tendons. Then you have again two tendons: the extensor carpi radialis longus and extensor carpi radialis brevis. So they are carpi. Flexor carpi radialis is inserted on the second and third metacarpal. But here you, instead of the flexor opposing the flexor carpi radialis, are extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis. Alright. Then there is the extensor carpi ulnaris. So we finished the wrist. Flexor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi ulnaris, flexor carpi radialis, extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis. Finish the wrist. Now we move the MP joints and the PIP and DIP joints. So one important tendon is which comes lateral to the medial to the Lister's tubercle, winds down the Lister's tubercle and obliquely approaches the thumb. This is the extensor pollicis longus. Now the extensor pollicis brevis will extend the adducted thumb. You can do it in your finger. And the thumb, when abducted, will align with the extensor pollicis longus and it will extend the abducted thumb. That's why there are two extensor pollicis brevis and extensor pollicis longus. That's why the two muscles. The brevis in the adducted thumb and the pollicis longus in the abducted thumb will perform the function of longus. So longus is up to this. Okay. So now the fingers, there is a expansion. I told you that there is a triangular expansion here. The expansion sides go and get inserted into the distal phalanx, and the middle gets inserted into the intermediate fragment. The expansion, basic insertion into the expansion is of the extensor digitorum, held by extensor digiti minimi on this side, extensor indicis on this side, and held by extensor digiti minimi on this side. Then for the rest, there is the extensor digitorum. So these four are extensor digitorum. And there is the extensor indicis on the index finger side and extensor digiti minimi on the little finger side. Then on the side of the extensor expansion is the insertion of interossei and lumbricals. So interossei and lumbricals are inserted on the side of the extensor expansion. The interossei would produce abduction adduction, and lumbricals would produce intrinsic plus position, opposite of which is claw hand. So this finishes the muscles around the hand. Now, thus, we have covered all the muscles that would elevate, depress, externally or internally rotate, protract or retract the scapula, that would abduct, adduct, flex, extend, internally and externally rotate the shoulder, that would flex, extend the elbow, that would pronate or supinate the forearm. You would remember that the supinator supinates in extension and biceps helps in supinating in flexion. So usually when you are tightening a screw, you flex the elbow. Then the flexors of the carpus, radialis and ulnaris, and extensors of the carpus, the radialis dividing into longus and brevis and ulnaris. Then the thumb muscles or pollex muscles, which are extensor pollicis longus and brevis, abductor pollicis longus and brevis, flexor pollicis longus and brevis, and opponens pollicis. Little finger called digiti minimi, you have the flexor pollicis brevis. The longus is the flexor digitorum profundus tendon, so you don't need a longus. Then abductor pollicis, abductor digiti minimi brevis, there is no longus, so abductor digiti minimi, and opponens digiti minimi, the hypothenar muscles. Then the muscles that would extend the system, the extensors of the carpus we have covered. The extensors of the MP joint are extensor digitorum held by extensor indicis and digiti minimi, and extensors of the thumb we have covered are extensor pollicis longus brevis. The abductors of the MP joint are lumbricals. The adductors, the abductors of the and adductors of the MP joint are the palmar and dorsal interossei, the pad dab muscles. The lumbricals would flex at the MP and extend at PIP and DIP, which is called as the intrinsic plus position, and the opposite of which is the claw hand. The flexors of the IP joints, here, the flexor digitorum superficialis, and the DIP joints, PIP and DIP joint is flexor digitorum profundus. So thus we have covered all these muscles. We have been able to place them in the arm, and we have basically revised their origin and insertion. Now we will go on to the nerve supply, and when we are routing the nerves through these muscles, you must remember their placement, where they are. Thank you.